pre-festival day is an opportunity for us to invite students from what we call our kinship program. I think we have 17 this year. It's an opportunity for us to invite friends, speakers who are participating in the rest of the festival, sponsors, and special guests, just to have a quiet day before the festival begins and go deep on a topic. So what is Old Salt Festival? I think it is trying to imagine what would it look like. What would it look like if we were the kind of people, the kind of society that really took care of each other and the land, long term. And then what is Old Salt Co-op? That's Old Salt Festival is part of Old Salt Co-op. Old Salt Co-op is an effort to say, if we took care of each other and the land, what would an economic system look like? What would that marketplace look like? How would it function, and how would it put rural and urban people in right relationship with each other? And so that's what Old Salt Festival and Old Salt Co-op is about. And how do you kind of dive into that? Spend time together and you break bread together, and it's nice to do that outside of a conference room. So thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you, Mom and Dad and family, for hosting it here. Thank you to the community of Helmville that accommodates this event every year. There's far too many thank yous that I owe to all of you and to a whole bunch of people to go around, so I won't continue to belabor that. Logan Smith is really the master of all of the organization that happens at this place, and I don't think she's here at this moment, but I'm very, very grateful to her and the army of volunteers that it takes to organize this event. So with that, I don't want to belabor super long introductions, but I will say I met Meriwether when she was riding her horses a long ways last summer and working on a book, and she just struck me immediately as this incredibly intense and at the same time very calm person, like that mix of just being very present. And when I think about what it would be like to plan a journey as long as your journey is across private and public lands, and to visit with so many different people, I was just struck. And so I asked her to curate this conversation today. When I was in college in Boston a while back, I was getting all kinds of questions about ranching, and urban people kind of asking, didn't you know that cattle can be really hard on the environment? Didn't you know that meat might be bad for health? And it started a questioning process for me, and somebody handed me a book by Wendell Berry. And a couple years later, when I graduated, and I haven't read everything, but I had read quite a bit by that time, and just been captivated by a powerful sense of home and the importance of homecoming. And so my brother picked me up, he flew out, and we drove back and made a pilgrimage, and we didn't want to bother anybody, but we drove through Port Royal, and we went to the little store there and saw the books in the corner, and we drove by what we thought might be the farmstead. We didn't want to loiter, but we were fans. And I just feel that Wendell Berry and the Berry family really have so much wisdom to teach us about what it might mean to endure in a place over a long period of time, and to be creatures in the right way. And so I'm very grateful that you have made the long journey here, Mary. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And then so I'm excited to have about an hour or so with Meriwether and Mary. And then I have a couple of friends who I'm just also very grateful to that will join in conversation a little bit later, Annalyn Levy and Sean Puckett. Because oftentimes when I would read Wendell Berry, I would be asking myself the question, okay, but if we need to stay really focused at home and at a humble scale that fits what a human being can do and think about and love, our world faces these big challenges. And it's tempting to just say, well, how do we change fast enough? And both Annalyn and Sean struck me as very intelligent people who were passionate about making big change. And so I wanted to bring their perspectives into the discussion. And so Meriwether has been very kind to curate that. So with that, welcome. Thank you all for being here. and I'm excited.
How is my sound? Good? Awesome. Thank you all. So when Cole first started talking to me about today, he used the words, "I want this to be the breaking of bread for the days that follow." And so before we break bread together, let's first set a table. And to set today's table, I want to ground us in the place that we are in. This valley has always been a crossroads, from the eastern plains to the western mountain lands. People have lived here and slept here and traveled here and hunted here for thousands of years. This is traditional lands for the Blackfeet Nation and many other tribes. The Mannix family spent one generation in New York after fleeing Ireland, and then they came west. T.B. Mannix in 1882 first purchased the original acreage of this ranch from the Northern Pacific Railroad. The Moore line of the family came here about a decade earlier from Virginia. And some of you may be lucky enough to meet Darlene Moore Mannix, who stewarded this land with her husband for many, many years, and who's now passed this land off to the next generations who steward it. And so I want to just call in and think about all those different people that are inviting us into this land today and the gratitude for that. And as part of that, I've asked Mary and myself to each bring something that represents our connection to land and the lands that we come from. So Mary, I would love for you to go first and to share what you've brought and why you chose this thing.
Well, thank you, Meriwether, and thank you, Cole. I'm so happy to be here in this beautiful, beautiful place. And Cole said a couple of things that set up what I brought from home perfectly. One is he talked about imagining, and that makes me think of vision. And I think vision is what we're lacking. What are we after? What do we want? We can say what we're against, but it's very hard for us to say what we want. So I've brought a poem by my father called A Vision. And if I started the Berry Center in 2011 to continue my family's work in Kentucky for small farmers and for their communities. And this poem, if we had an official long, it's not that long, don't worry. If we had a long mission statement, this would be it. I also want to mention that Cole also talked about how do we live responsibly. And I think everything that my father has written about for decades is in this poem, because the way we live responsibly is that we accept limits. We accept the limits of particular places where we live, and we try to respect the limits. That's the problem with our culture and our economy. It's got no limits. And one more thing, Meriwether suggested that I could bring some things like maybe a pebble from my home. Well, we don't have pebbles at home, we have rocks. And I found this poem much easier to pack. This poem is called A Vision, as I said. If we will have the wisdom to survive, to stand like slow-growing trees on a ruined place, renewing, enriching it, if we will make our seasons welcome here, asking not too much of earth or heaven, then a long time after we are dead, the lives our lives prepare will live there, their houses strongly placed upon the valley sides, fields and gardens rich in the windows. The river will run clear as we will never know it, and over it, birdsong like a canopy. On the levels of the hills will be green meadows, stock bells in noon shade. On the steeps where greed and ignorance cut down the old forest, an old forest will stand, its rich leaf fall drifting on its roots. The veins of forgotten springs will have opened. Families will be singing in the fields. In their voices, they will hear a music risen out of the ground. They will take nothing from the ground they will not return, whatever the grief at parting. Memory, native to this valley, will spread over it like a grove, and memory will grow into legend, legend into song, song into sacrament. The abundance of this place The songs of its people and its birds will be health and wisdom and indwelling light. This is no paradisal dream. Its hardship is its possibility. He's good.
So good. Thank you, Mary. I think we're going to call words from your father many more times in our conversation.
Probably.
Calling words. So I did not bring a pebble, but I did bring this piece of cottonwood bark. I come from a farm in Vermont, and I feel very connected to that land, and it very much shaped me, but it is not land that I am currently on. My family still is on that land. But so when I thought about something to bring to share with you that shows my connection to land and the people tied to that land, I brought this piece of cottonwood bark. As Cole shared, last year I spent 5 months living on horseback with a ride horse, my pack horse, and my dog, riding through a large portion of the West in search of questions and answers and listening and stories, as I was looking for conversations about the future of our West and the importance of the working landscape and the people tied to that landscape. And as I rode, I accidentally followed in the footsteps of one of my ancestors. I say accidentally because it was not the goal of my trip, and it is not what I led with or what I said I was doing when I met with people. My name is Meriwether Lewis Hardie, and I'm named after my ancestor, Meriwether Lewis, of the Lewis and Clark exploration. And I have a lot of both pride and also things that I hold tenderly about what that expedition was. I'm going to talk about it more on Saturday in another conversation with Mary. And for those of you who are interested, I will share more there. But as I rode, and I say accidentally because, of course, my ancestors and my name have influenced largely who I am. But as I rode on the Missouri, there were so many moments where I came around bends and turns where I could not see any human modern infrastructure. I could not see roads or buildings, and it was powerful to think that that land probably did not look that different than it did 200 years ago as my ancestor paddled up the land that I was riding up. And I camped with a family outside of Great Falls, and a couple hours into the conversation, they cautiously asked me about my name, and I shared the story, and they got very excited. And they took me down to the river, and on their land, the expedition had stopped because they had one of their boats was having problems leaking, and they decided to cut down 2 cottonwood trees and build 2 canoes. And these ranchers took me to the cottonwood grove, and there was a giant cottonwood tree that had just recently fallen down, and they have counted the rings, and this tree was absolutely there when Lewis and Clark came through. And so they gave me a piece of bark from that tree. And this tree, whether or not it was touched by people in that expedition, it certainly saw them and watched them as they went by. And so this piece of bark, to me, connects me to land that comes way before my time, but is part of my story. So it's the object that I brought. I would now love to pause us for a moment before we go into conversation, Mary and I, because each of us is connected to land. And I know that's what brings us here today. Some of us, I've already talked to you, where you come from your ranch and you're on your land every single day and it is woven through your life. And others of us live farther away from perhaps the land that really has formed our relationship to how we think about land. And in our busy, fast-paced world and concrete worlds, it can sometimes feel easy to feel far away from land. So I would love for each person, you can either close your eyes or just lower your eyes to the ground, whatever you're most comfortable with. And I'm going to ask a couple questions and ask you just to think about land. And I'm going to give some space in between each question so you have some moments to process and think. Think about a place in the natural world that helps shape how you feel connected to land today. Whether that is in your childhood or something more recent. Where is this place? What does it look like, sound like, smell like? Are there animal sounds there? When does the wind touch it? Have you been there at night? What does it feel like in the dark when you can't see any outlines? Who first brought you into relationship with this place? Was it a family member, a friend? Did you discover it on your own? What was their relationship to this land, and how did that influence yours? And maybe in a final moment, you can just give that land an appreciation and those people, knowing that some part of that is influencing you to be here today and to continue to keep caring and figuring out ways to support each other in this type of work. You can open your eyes. Thank you. So Mary, in our conversations, one thing I am always struck by is how you talk about your inheritance. And the first time you talked about your inheritance, I had to slow down and really listen. And I realized that you were talking about the land ethics and the values and the stories that you were born into in your family. And I have a quote here from you that you shared with me when we first talked, where you said, "I was raised thinking I remembered things I couldn't have remembered because I wasn't even born. The stories were so strong that I thought I remembered people who had died long before I was born." I'm curious to have you reflect with us for a moment on that childhood of yours that you were born into and into the inheritance that you were born into.
Well, I consider myself one of the most fortunate people because I was given a vision. I was raised with a vision and a love for a particular place, and all I had to do was accept it. So from the time I can remember, I was surrounded by stories and people who loved me and I loved. And I don't remember ever wanting to be anywhere but Henry County, Kentucky. And I still feel that way. I'm feeling that way right this minute. But I'm also happy to be here. Now that, when I was growing up, my parents moved around a lot. My father had a Guggenheim Fellowship and we spent a year in Europe. My father had a Stegner Fellowship and we spent a year in California, living at, the fellowship was at Stanford. We lived in New York City for a couple of years before we came home permanently in 1964 to Lane's Landing Farm, where my parents are right now, to live and to farm. All the years, my memories of being gone those years all involve wanting to come home. I was always, my Uncle John, who was an incredible farmer and lawyer and advocate for small farmers, was also a singer, and I would listen to Flatt and Scruggs songs wherever we lived and cry for him. I was just a pleasure for my parents, I can tell you, from the start right up till today. So I'm just lucky. I mean, I think when Cole was talking about my family living in a particular place for a long time, I don't think we deserve any credit for it. We've just done what we wanted to do. Daddy wanted to come home. Mom, my mother, is the amazing one. I mean, she was born in Northern California and raised in, as she says, in museums and in symphony halls. And my father went home, my mother made a home. And as she says, quoting Gary Snyder, "You can make a home, just stay somewhere." So as I said, we've done what we wanted to do. I don't want to be anywhere but where I live, so I don't deserve any credit for it. I've just been lucky to be able to stay there. Is that what you want to know? Do you want to know more?
That was perfect. We're going to go deeper.
Okay.
So when you talk about thinking about making a home versus coming home, I'm curious because you are 8 generations now on your family's land, and you now have 10 generations because there are grandchildren. When someone asks you about making a home, and your point about your mother, where she made a home, what is your advice to, especially maybe young folks who are seeking a home or don't come from that family legacy that you do?
Well, first of all, let me say that we have a home place. I don't farm on it. My brother has a part of what was the home place. We're not all on our home, what we call the home place, but we're all near it. I think that one of the most important things we all have to do, and I have to do it myself. I have to check myself all the time about my expectations and what I want and where I take my pleasure. We have students at the Berry Center. This is one of the things we say to the students. If you want a life farming, you're going to have to take your pleasures from farming. You're going to have to find your joy, your hope, your vacations, all of it are going to have to be on that place. You better check your middle class expectations about what you want out of life. So I think that's one thing. I mean, I used to think upward mobility was our problem. We've had education for upward mobility for 50, 60, 100 years now. And I think that has ruined our education system. We can talk more about that if you want to. But I think mobility is a pretty serious problem. I mean, nobody's expecting to stay where they find themselves. So I think as my friend Wes Jackson says, the most important major in colleges and universities now needs to be homecoming. How do we live in particular places? And I mean, our goal needs to be no harm. But to be truthful, I guess, and realistic, as little harm as possible. So I think it's just checking yourself. My mother moved to Henry County, Kentucky from Mill Valley, California. She had family in Kentucky also. But she didn't have an expectation that she would, if she didn't like it there, if it proved too difficult or too hot in the summer or too cold in the winter, that she would be going somewhere else. And she was surrounded by, I will say, I mean, we should talk about farm culture, but she was surrounded by a farm culture. She was surrounded by women who helped her, who taught her and supported her in learning how to live at home.
Could you share more about that, of your mother being a new person in a new community as a female, and so there was a female community that really helped her integrate?
Oh, yes. I have some forceful female relatives. Some of them have moved on to wherever they wanted to go, I'm sure. But and by that I don't mean they've moved to another place. I mean they have passed on. But they just held on to her, and friends too, not just relatives. I don't know if any of you have read Daddy's fiction, but they're all in there. They just have different names. There's a couple named Elton and Mary Penn in most of Daddy's fiction, and Elton Penn is Owen Flood, and Mary Penn is Lois Flood. And Lois Flood, I mean, I haven't gone a day of my life without thinking about those two and what they accomplished. But they taught my mother how to garden and can and cook. Yeah.
Wow. So I'm thinking about a younger version of you, Mary Berry, in your teens and in your early 20s. Did you ever rebel against the land ethics or the inheritance or that homecoming and when I say rebel, in terms of you exploring or being like, is this the path I want, or was that always very clear?
Well, let me just say that it's tough having parents that are right about almost everything. In fact, just about everything, except for, when I should be able to date when I was 16. I remember very clearly I did not want to work on the farm. It was not my plan, and I said to my parents, probably daily for probably decades, I did not choose to live this way. And, or I very charmingly would say, why do you all do everything the hardest way possible? Or why don't we have a television? Or why don't we have vacations? And why don't we have Coke? And, I made myself pretty obnoxious. And I think when I went away to college, they were vastly relieved and fairly shocked when I came back. But actually, I never, ever wanted anything else really, except when I was a teenager to do exactly what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. I did have a period of time that I wanted long fingernails, and that just didn't work at all. So,
I'll share, my mom's here in the front row, and I went through a very short period of time where I really wanted platform shoes and a short skirt, and she wouldn't let me have either, so I made some out of duct tape and wore them to school, and she said, if you're gonna make your own clothes, that's fine. And she made me flour sandwiches, and all I wanted was like Oreos. And she took us to school in a pony cart. You've
just reminded me. Do you know the writer Annie Lamott?
Yes.
She says that in her writing classes, she always says, let's talk about school lunches, because everybody has a story. So in Henry County, Kentucky, my mother was a Mill Valley lefty, whole grain kind of person, and I was taking homemade bread sandwiches with stuff she made in the middle and sprouts on it. And
I understand what that feels like, yeah.
And I thought, well, someday I'll probably get rich, and when I do, I will have snack cakes and Coke for lunch. But yeah, nobody wanted to trade with me.
I also know how that feels.
Yeah, it was terrible. Well, you were in Vermont. Wasn't it easier in Vermont? Don't people love yogurt in Vermont?
I think it's probably, especially the parents in this crowd, a little relieving to hear that you also had your rebellious streak, that streak, but then you found your way very quickly back to farming on your own. And can you share with us about those years of you farmed with your husband for many years?
Yeah, I have farmed full-time until the Berry Center started in 2011. And we started farming with a dairy and tobacco and raising some small grain for cattle. As the old farmers at home say, if grain leaves this farm, it'll walk off, which is a whole different thing than how people are using grain now. We did a lot of subsistence farming. We had beef cattle from the start as well, and put up hay and all the things that go with all of that. And we dairied through 2 serious droughts. And when we were borrowing money to keep going after the second one, we began a change that finally changed everything.
You all also had the first CSA.
My husband.
Your husband had the first
yes.
CSA in the state of Kentucky.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that? Because it's very
Maybe
different
I should
today.
say we're talking about 2 different husbands.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. One vastly better than the other.
Well, I'm glad you found the second one. I'm guessing that's the better one?
Yes. Yes. Some people learn from experience and some people don't. I happen to be one that does.
Because in our conversations, why I'm thinking about the CSA is that when you talk about what that was like then versus what that like today, that it's a very different market.
Oh, yes. Yes, we, on 2 different farms, my husband and I both dairied and both raised tobacco and both moved toward, I'm going to say organic, because it was organic, it wasn't certified organic, agriculture. So we, on my farm and with my daughters, we raised pastured poultry, processing a couple of hundred every 2 weeks from May until October. We raised vegetables for market. We raised vegetables for CSA. We had the first certified organic, this one was certified, organic beef herd in the state of Kentucky. My husband started the first CSA in Kentucky on his farm, and we both prospered. We both kept farming through the end of tobacco. And so the local food movement worked for us. It was I had several revelations that led to the start of the Berry Center. One was that we were stuck. We were stuck with either industrial agriculture, large and industrial agriculture, or small and entrepreneurial, with almost nothing in the middle. It was also clear to me that the young farmers that my husband ran his CSA for 15 years. He paid his farm off, and then he handed his customer list and his help to a younger farmer. That farmer today still runs a CSA, but he struggles to get anywhere near the number of subscribers that Steve had. My husband's name is Steve. He had a 100-person waiting list the entire time he ran his CSA. So it was just becoming clear. And we did pasture poultry. There was one article about us in the Courier-Journal, the late great, well, it still exists, but it used to be great, newspaper in Kentucky, and the chickens sold themselves for the entire time we were doing it. I just had to organize it. Now, of course, because of regulations and so on, it's just not so easy to do it anymore. You can't process your own anymore. And all our farmers are in direct competition with organic chicken, organic vegetables, organic everything. At our local Kroger, you can get organic sandwich cookies the competition has changed, and people's intelligence hasn't. People don't know the difference between industrial organic and what people are raising. Steve says that his CSA was, his subscribers would have done anything to get better food. They were going to come to pick this stuff up in the rain. They were devoted to this. We haven't increased those people. We've just made it easier for a lot of people to get what they think they want. Has nothing to do with land use.
Well, as part of your and my conversations, one thing that I found really interesting is you talking about how to be the first to do something initially pays off.
First adopters.
First adopter.
Yeah.
And to be entrepreneurial in that sense. And then in an ideal system, the fact that you have more people, more farmers going directly to consumers and keeping more of that margin, keeping more of those dollars is a really positive thing, but then you have more competition. And so what do you do then? And so I know how you have talked to me about the Berry Center is really thinking beyond of how do we create regional food systems?
Right.
And can you talk to us about even the moment when you realized that the work you were doing farming could go further if you did it through the Berry Center in terms of reaching and impacting people differently?
Well, what I realized was that we were losing ground. And what I realized was that this local food system that I had been hearing about for, at that point, 2 decades, that we were no closer to some kind of infrastructure that would move food 40 miles into Louisville than we had been in the late 1990s. Mm-hmm. So I made a list of what I thought needed to be worked on, and the miseducation of farmers in our land-grant universities is one. The fact that our farmers at home are cut off from the information they need the most, and hearing mostly from land grants and Farm Bureau and agri-industrial corporations. I don't know, there was quite a list, and it was Daddy who said, "It sounds like you're starting a center." And I thought, well, maybe I'm starting a center. So I did. But we have in the history of Kentucky, this is a complicated subject, but it was the subject, or the cooperative that allowed small farmers to make a living treating land well, was the Burley Tobacco Growers Cooperative. That is a cooperative that started in the 20s. It didn't work very well. It was dormant, and by 1941, my grandfather took the strands of what was left of it and turned it into a program that worked for 60 plus years and worked for the people it was supposed to work, which were small family farmers. And I've had to learn, just as my father and brother had to learn, that program was not about tobacco. It was about farmers. So I have, and in my grandfather's papers that we have at the Berry Center, he says the principles of protecting farmers from overproduction, but limiting production in order to maintain parity. Parity is so important. In order to maintain parity is, will work for anything farmers can produce, and he says in his papers, from tobacco to timber. And so I was confused about why nobody was trying this. I was on a couple of boards, one a grassroots organization that made up mostly of people who just discovered that their backyard was a farm. And I was also on the Farm Service Agency Board, which is a huge, you all know, a USDA program. And I was struck by the fact that farmers from Kentucky didn't have any notion of the history of agriculture in Kentucky, and the program ended in 2004. And since then, we've lost 10,000 farms and innumerable farmers. So I took those principles and applied it to cattle production, and started work with 10 young farm families, generational farm families, and that is our Home Place Meat, and that's one of the programs at the Berry Center.
Can you share a couple more layers of detail for those who don't know about the Burley Tobacco Program and co-op, in terms of how price support and different competition versus collaboration?
Yes,
and how those values then are going into what you're doing today.
It fostered an economy of cooperation, not competition. It fostered a culture. It kept a culture alive. And I will skip ahead a little and then go back to your actual question. One of the things I've seen with the young farmers we're working with is that they started together in a room, called by me to a room, as utterly silent, just kind of waiting to see what we were offering. And by 2 years into the program, you couldn't keep them quiet. You couldn't keep them, they're stopping by the office to tell us what they think about, I mean, they're thinking again. They're not just price takers. They're thinking about quality. And it's been, I mean, I wouldn't have guessed that could happen so fast. Anyway, the Burley Tobacco Program was a quota. There was a quota on every farm in Kentucky and in the 8-state Burley Belt. You could only raise, we bought a 200-acre farm when we first started farming. We had a 5-acre tobacco base. So that meant the least erodible land was plowed, and around it really was perennial agriculture. So it protected farmers and the farmland from overproduction. And of course, we had a tobacco culture. We've been raising tobacco for 150 or more years. So those are the principles I've brought to bear. And we should make it clear that this was never a subsidy program. This was a price support program. So it didn't cost the government anything. It just meant that farmers could, the co-op could hold the product if the price fell.
And so, for example, on that 200 acre, you had 5 acres in tobacco, but then you had multiple other types of crops. And so many farmers farm like that, where it was just a set percentage of acres.
It kept a highly diversified agriculture in place. Yeah.
You have told me that the center's mission, the Berry Center's mission, is to put your father's writing to work. Mm-hmm. And how has that evolved over since 2011?
Well, the vision I wrote for the Berry Center, I wrote in 2009, and I am pleased to say that what I wrote is what we're doing. Now we've had to move things around and think differently about some things, but we have stuck to the mission. It was to put Daddy's writing to work. In fact, Dad says about his own father's work that his father did the important work, which was to put a sustaining a sustaining economy under good agriculture, and he and John, his brother, just took it up, and now the Berry Center has taken it up.
Well, thinking about your father's writing, I carried 2 books on my ride last year, and one was the same book that I took the whole way, and it got kind of beat up. I don't know if you recognize this.
Well, I've got one that looks like that.
What book is this, Mary?
It's The Unsettling of America.
So this is Wendell Berry's Unsettling of America. It has a lot of duct tape on it, and it's gotten a little bit ripped up, but this was in my saddlebags for my entire ride last year. And I carried a second book that I would trade out, and someone would give me a book, and I'd read it and pass it on. But this book I reread time after time again. And I'm curious, a show of hands, how many people have read The Unsettling of America?
You can lie.
There's just a moment of celebration, or not a moment, but this book next year is celebrating its 50 years of being published and out in this world. And this book has had so much impact on so many people. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to say something. I'd like to say to you what Daddy says about that book. He says that book has had its unhappy result is that it's still needed. What would have been better, and I say this about our work at the Berry Center, it would be better if we didn't need that book anymore, and it would be better if we didn't need the Berry Center anymore. So one of the things I think those of us who are so deeply involved in these efforts need to think about is why aren't these words more effective?
I was going to ask you that question because this book this version was 26 years after it was first published. So there's a foreword and a note from him in the back, from Wendell Berry in the back, reflecting on this book. I'm proud of it, and a lot of people have had a lot of disagreement with it, but no one's ever been able to prove it wrong because it's still needed.
Right.
And that there's still so much work to do. And so 25 years after he wrote those words, now 50 years after this was published, the work is more needed than ever.
And he's just written a new afterword for the next edition.
Wow.
Yeah.
How is he, I was going to ask you how he's reflecting on this now, 50 years later.
I don't think he is much. I told him, or I asked him if he would do an interview with me about The Unsettling. I'm doing a podcast about 50 years of The Unsettling. And he said he didn't remember what was in it. And I said, well, Daddy, you've pretty much written about the same thing for 70 years, so it's pretty much what you've always written. I spoke of my mother earlier. She says that my father has made a career out of repeating himself.
Well, the words are still needed. I wanted to read a couple words from this book that I've been reflecting on. By ruin of farmers and rural communities, by erosion, pollution, and various kinds of industrial and urban development, we have ominously degraded and reduced the long-term food-producing capacity of our country. Those words are important to me because sometimes in my research and writing process, as I'm talking about the importance of family-scale farms and ranches, sometimes people's reactions to me is, oh, that's so quaint, or like, oh, like that, yeah, wouldn't that be beautiful if that's how we could grow food? And I try to not like bark at them when they say that to me. I try to have a very, mature, calm but as Cole would say, calm and intense response to elicit respect. But Mary, how do you respond, or how do you talk to someone who thinks that family scale operations or family owned operations is cute or sweet, but doesn't understand the deeper context for our economy, our food security, our culture?
Well, I start with the fact that I hate nostalgia. So there's one thing. I also, I mean, I don't think we have time to go into all the things I say, and there are many, but it seems to me fundamentally, how do we think we're going to feed people by destroying the source of what we've got to have to survive? I mean, it's just, it will not work. Things are going to get more difficult to get. It's already getting that way. I've got chef friends at home that are talking about how much more limited what they can get from their suppliers is. And I'm talking about local food, but also not local food. The food just isn't being, the varieties aren't being grown anymore. So I'm writing something now about what Homeland Security ought to mean. I've written about this before, and I'm going to continue to write about it and try to get better at it. But what does Homeland Security mean? If a nation can't feed itself, I don't know what all these chest beating. I don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. It's just shocking ignorance. That's what I say, shocking ignorance.
I'll try that line next time someone approaches me with that question. So on a similar note, scale is at the heart of so many of our problems. How do you think about right scale in farming, in processing, and in the communities that surround them?
I think I understand pretty well what the right scale of farming is in Henry County and in the region that I live in. I'd be hard pressed to tell you what the right scale is here. I'd say it's bigger, but it's different. So this is why I think regional economies are the way, regional food economies are the place we need to start, is the way we need to be working. And the way policy needs to be working. I mean, what's going to support local economies? Because I think the change we need is going to take people like Cole, like some of the people I'm working with, and other people across the country who know where they are and how to farm in the places that they actually are and love those places. I think that it's going to take that. I was taught growing up that to do good work, one must start with an inventory. What do you have to work with? I started the work at the Berry Center with this. What do I have here? What's still here? I have pieces of a pretty good farm culture still left. I have a well-watered landscape. I mean, I had a long list. I have a list written down of the inventory. Well, I can make that inventory and I can stand by it because I've lived there all my life. And furthermore, I'm gonna live there all my life. So if I fail at this, I'll just try something else. But I'm not going to, so I'm just gonna keep on. As Daddy says, I've gotten too old now to care. I'm just gonna keep on. And he's by the way, almost 92, so.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How, when you talk with your father about the future that you both hope for, what do those conversations look like?
Well, Daddy doesn't believe in the future, and he refuses to talk about it. He says the only way we can learn is to look at the past. The future doesn't exist, and so we need to figure out every day the correct thing that's right in front of us to do. I mean, he believes that we can be provisional. Say we know we need a couple of bushels of potatoes to get through the winter, we should raise those. But in terms of prognosticating about the future, he doesn't do it.
When you think about that future.
Okay. I'm comfortable thinking about the future when I move to vision. And when we talked, you asked me at the start of this, what it was, my inherited vision, my inheritance. I have a vision for what we're after, and I have the vision because I lived in it. The Henry County of my youth was a prosperous, really quite beautiful agricultural community. The little towns looked good. People's pride, as Daddy says in The Unsettling, was in their homes, and it showed. There was community agriculture, which kept people out of the money economy to some extent. You could get what you needed in most of our little towns. You could get your hardware and what you needed at the grocery store and so on. I'm old, but I'm not that old. I mean, in my lifetime, that the possibility, let's say in my father's lifetime, the possibility that somebody could buy a farm in Henry County, Kentucky and make a living farming it has lived and died. At this point, there's not a thriving town in Henry County. They're all dead or dying. So I have a vision that I'm quite comfortable with, and the vision is health. The vision is healthy, reasonably sized farms with people who can make a living on them and are expecting to hand those farms down to their children. I mean, I could go into what it looks like, but I can invite you to come to Henry County and I can show you something about what it looks like.
I was reading a section of Unsettling recently, and I was struck with just thinking about some of the writing your father had on the importance of physical labor and the respect for labor, and how our education system has not taught that. And you made a comment before about our education system. I'd love to revisit that when you think about the vision for education in the future.
Well, I'm going to again repeat Wes Jackson's call, and this was actually, he gave this in a commencement speech that he gave in something like 1999 in a college or university in Kansas, and he said, the major from now on needs to be how are we going to live in particular places without destroying them. And I'm going to stand by that, and I'm going to say we need to check ourselves. I mean, we have looked down on country people and people who work for with their bodies, and it's not just our history, it's the history of humans. So we need to begin to think differently about, I don't think I have to say that too much here, but I think we need to think differently about doing our own work, for one thing. Daddy says every July 4th, it's the celebration of independence by the most dependent people the world has ever seen. So we're getting close to the 250th.
Are there any particular lines from your father's writing that you find yourself returning to in difficult times or in times of hope? Your father's written over 50 books.
It's written over 60 books, I think. Yeah.
So much, so many. But just thinking about the words or the essays or...
I think for me it's the fiction that I go back to because it comforts me. Daddy's written fiction, and I'm not sure how many people have read Dad's fiction in this audience, but some of the characters are not fictional at all. There's a character named Wheeler Catlett who is my grandfather, John Berry Sr. He just is. I mean, there's Owen Flood, I mentioned. Burley Coulter is a fictional character, and so on. But anyway, those stories of people standing with each other, supporting each other. My grandfather in fiction told in a fictional story, my grandfather, in the voice of Wheeler Catlett, says to Elton Penn, "You buy that farm, I'll stand behind you." That happened. That happened a block from where the Berry Center is right now. Those kinds of things bring me such hope. I mean, we can do the right thing that's right in front of us to do. We can. We just need to get started or keep on. Just keep on. And I think the biggest thing the thing that worries me, I have a lot of things that worry me at night, but one is I mean, I'm going to work on some policy. But we can talk about that at some point if anybody wants to know about it. But we've got to make a long-term commitment. That's the thing that worries me about some of the work that I'm doing now. I've got to say, if everybody decides that they agree with us right now, and that every way we're working is right, it's going to take 100 years to turn this thing around. There's just no question, because we've lost too many people. It's not just the land, it's the people and the knowledge and the culture. My favorite quotation in the Unsettling is the one about culture. It turns out a culture is, you have to have a culture that will support good land use. So that's my, we're going to have to say, we're not going to see the end of this. Nobody in this room is going to see the end of this. And then maybe nobody will see the end of it. We'll have to watch it every minute of every day. Defend it. Defend it.
Well, I'm thinking about things that are hard and having to defend it or work hard for it. A friend of mine just shared with me, I was feeling stuck with my writing process, and just shared with me this Wendell Berry quote. "There are, it seems, two muses, the muses of inspiration who gives us inarticulate visions and desires, and the muse of realization who returns again and again to say, it is yet more difficult than you thought. This is the muse of form. It may be then that form serves us best when it works as obstruction, to baffle us and deflect our intended course. It may be then, when we no longer know what to do, we have begun then our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings." And that is from Poetry and Marriage, the Use of Old Forms, from Wendell Berry. I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. Yeah, and it's okay to be, it's okay to be baffled. I've certainly learned that from my father. That confusion is all right, you just keep going. The thing that I've learned at the Berry Center is that you have to, this sounds stupid, but you have to start. You can't sit around wondering about trying to solve all the problems you're gonna come up against before you start. You have to start, and then the problems have shape. Then you begin to understand what you have to solve to continue the work you want to do.
That's actually a good note, because we're going to transition into the next part of our agenda, but I wanted to see if there are other words or advice, or just thinking about, what is possible when you bring a group of people like this together, and in the days that are following, people who are coming from all walks of life and who care deeply, and it's so easy to feel stuck.
Well, I think if you get the scale right, you can get great satisfaction from just doing the work. If the scale's wrong, you'll have to quit. If I had started the Berry Center thinking I was going to deal with the global issues or even Kentucky's issues, I would have given up before I started, I think. But what I started with is Henry County's issues. And as my father says about the Berry Center, a solution that doesn't work locally or a global solution that won't work locally won't work anywhere and is of no use. So I think you have to get the scale of your work right and be realistic about what you can do. 15 years in at the Berry Center, I'm doing some things that I wouldn't have done at the outset. I think I think you have to believe the truth, that a person of goodwill can do the right thing that's right in front of them to do, even if they're in prison. You can keep doing it. And the other thing is something that I think about, I do think about this every day, but this is not from my father, and it's this: the cavalry ain't coming. We're going to have to do this ourselves, and that's, I think we can get help if we know what we're doing. But the cavalry, and I'll use the cavalry to represent our leadership in this country, they don't know anything. They don't have any vision. They don't know what needs to be done. So we need to get real clear about what needs to be done in the places that we are, the places that we love. And then maybe we can get some help from them because we can tell them what to do. Maybe. But that's looking into the future. And you see my father's problem with it? But it's just been very helpful to me to stop waiting. Because I thought when I was farming and thinking about this local food system that was about to manifest itself, I was being delusional, honestly. Mm-hmm. But I also think somebody needs to be able to farm and not also have to solve the rest of the problems of the world. So hence the Berry Center. And Cole and all of you, I'm sure, and what you do.
Well, your work, Mary, is incredibly inspirational to us.
Well, thank you.
And it's an honor to be here on the stage with you. And so thank you for everything you're doing. And I know that there are many people in this audience that are going to probably try to continue on the conversations that we've started here today.
Well, I hope so.